After a high school boy in Brazil was bullied in some truly bizarre ways, he came to drop out of school. Unable to move on, he decided to recruit two of his friends to help him carry out his revenge that would play out on a grand scale. While the country of Brazil is notorious for having a high murder rate and a problem with gun violence, school shootings are actually very rare despite that fact. However, due to a number of different factors, school shootings have been increasingly becoming more of a worldwide phenomenon. This case is one of the best examples of that to occur in recent years. By pure coincidence, it was barely even mentioned in the international news, and that's for a pretty interesting reason. Before we get into all that though, let's start at the beginning. Guilherme Tauchi Monteiro was born on July 5, 2001 in Brazil. To be specific, he was born in Mogi das Cruzes, a city close to Suzano. He had one older brother who he had never lived with. He did live with his two younger sisters though. They all lived together with their grandparents. This is because Guilherme and his sisters didn't really have the best parents around. Their father was basically missing in action and their mother was a heavy drug user. As a result, they had never lived with them long. They came to see their grandparents as their actual parents. Given that his grandparents were getting up there in years, Guilherme helped out with taking care of his sisters and raising them himself. Guilherme was a big fan of different nu metal bands, taking an interest in Slipknot in particular. Of all of their songs, People Equals Shit came to be his favorite. However, there were some parts of the scene that he despised. Given his mother's appetite for drugs, Guilherme came to hate them himself, saying that anyone who abused drugs should be killed. Guilherme was a big horror fan, taking a large interest in creepypastas in particular. He followed a Brazilian YouTube channel called Ambuplay that had a selection of videos based on creepypasta stories and characters. As well, he followed another channel called The Laughing Prophet that showcased much of the same. He kept a notebook of drawings of these characters. This was where he showcased some of his favorites, Jeff the Killer and Slender Man. Many of the other drawings in his notebook were nearly direct copies of the pages found in a Slender Man game called Slender the 8 Pages. On another page, he drew Slender Man himself. He drew other characters as well, usually wearing hoods. He also took an interest in weapons, mainly handguns, drawing at least one detailed rendition of one. On one page, he made a drawing of none other than Freddy Fazbear. Eventually, it came time for Guilherme to enter into high school. He began to take classes at the Professor Raul Brazil State School. Little did he know he was in for a bad time. Immediately he was bullied for wearing all black and for his, at the time, horrible acne. He was ridiculed by other students and even by the teachers from time to time. One of the worst things his bullies would do would be something truly traumatizing. You see, Guilherme's mother had come to act in some amateur adult videos. Once the bullies got wind of this, they would hold Guilherme down and force him to watch these videos while they laughed and beat him. Guilherme came to take more of an interest in the goth subculture, dressing in a manner that people would see as edgy. More concerningly, he came to take an even bigger interest in Nazism. However, it was an interest in one certain event that would send him spiraling. During all of this bullying, Guilherme came to discover the story of the Columbine Massacre on the internet during his freshman year. He was immediately enthralled with the case. In his mind, it was a heroic tale of two teenage boys who had been bullied and took their revenge out on the school in a way that nobody ever forgot. Not only that, but the two killers, Eric Harris and Dylan Klebold, shared similar interests as him, albeit 90s versions of them. The whole thing really spoke to Guilherme. He began to fantasize about pulling off something similar himself. It all hit a boiling point when Guilherme decided to defend himself. He attacked the main student who had been picking on him for 2 years. After, he went to the school board and told them about everything that had been happening. To his shock, instead of helping him out, the administration defended the bully. Guilherme had gotten in trouble for striking back one time when the bully had gotten nothing for 2 years. After these 2 years in high school, Guilherme came to drop out in 2018 due to both this and the severe bullying and harassment in general. Now, Guilherme was left with nothing to do but look for any job that he could get. Luckily, he learned that a friend that he had known for years might have a way to help him out in that endeavor. Guilherme's friend was a man named Luiz Henrique, born in 1993, making him about 8 years older than him. Still, despite the age gap, the two had always been very close. Luiz worked with his dad, which was his main source of income. He convinced his father to give Guilherme a job as well, who promised to get him a job doing the same thing that Luiz was doing, square cleaning and conservation in Sao Paulo. Unlike Guilherme, Luiz had come from a pretty nice family with parents, a grandfather, and a brother who were all very kind to him. Like Guilherme, he had also attended the Professor Raul Brazil State School and didn't have a very good opinion of it. He actually transferred to a different school after only 1 year. While it doesn't seem that he was actually bullied, he did have a hard time getting along with his teachers. This wasn't really anything new though, as Luiz had never been the best student. In fact, he had failed 8th grade 3 times before even attending high school. Still though, Luiz was a fairly normal guy in comparison to Guilherme. He liked soccer, riding his bike around town, 80s metal music, and video games. One of his favorites was Call of Duty. While he mainly stayed indoors, one of his favorite things to do when he was out was hit up some local internet cafes and play some games with Guilherme. Ever since the two had met as kids, they were usually together. They would often hang out at a local mall or visit a neighbor's house to have some LAN parties and play games together. They would often hit up a local arcade as well. While at the internet cafe, they wouldn't talk to other people, only communicating with each other. It was noticed by an employee of the cafe that they would often take turns wearing the same swastika pendant around their necks. Unlike Guilherme, Luiz never seemed to show his anger too often. Or, to be more accurate, when he did, he wasn't aggressive. There were times when his hidden anger would present itself. He wasn't a very good sport and did tend to get pretty irate whenever he lost a game. A switch would flip in his mind, changing him from a timid and soft-spoken man to one that was having a full-on temper tantrum blowout. Most of the time, though, he was shy and reserved to a fault. Some girls had even tried to date him, but he would actually chicken out and ghost their dates each and every time. His own father described him as being very weak-willed, often just going along with what other people wanted. Much like Guilherme, though, Luiz had picked up some darker interests. He was a very big fan of Russia, coming to idolize their government quite a bit. He also came to find himself very interested in guns and weaponry. After he heard of a school shooting that took place in the Realengo School in Rio de Janeiro, Luiz began to take a fascination with mass shootings as well. While Luiz's father did get Guilherme a job, it wasn't for too long. While he was working though, his grandfather said that he earned about 1,400 Brazilian real per month, which is about $258 US, and received the local equivalent of food stamps. He used this to help his grandpa out with grocery shopping expenses, given that his only income was the minimum retirement wage at the time. That job eventually came to an end, but Guilherme seemed to take it in stride. After all, he still had an uncle, 51-year-old Jorge Antonio Moraes, who could help lend him a hand. Jorge ended up getting Guilherme a job washing cars at his car rental shop. For reasons unknown though, Guilherme lost his job about 2 months later. Again though, he didn't seem all too bothered. However, this may have just been a front. In hindsight, many people have come to wonder if he began to hold a good amount of animosity towards his uncle over this. In December of 2018, something much worse than unemployment would come to take over Guilherme's life. This was when his grandmother passed away. It was after this that Guilherme slowly started to show signs of clinical depression. At the time though, it was said that he never shed a single tear. A little concerned with his lack of reaction, his grandpa asked him if he wasn't suffering. Guilherme reassured him, telling him, "Grandpa, I felt it in my own way." A few days later, Guilherme once again approached his grandfather, asking him what they should do now that his grandmother was dead. His grandpa responded simply that it was now up to the two of them to raise the girls. With Grandma gone, Uncle Jorge began to worry about Guilherme's future. He approached him, saying that he would help care for him in addition to his grandfather. However, he crossed the line in Guilherme's mind when he encouraged him to go back to school, the very same Raul Brazil school from where he had dropped out. Guilherme was disgusted at the idea. Throughout this time, Guilherme didn't hang out with Luiz any less and kept picking up various odd jobs to earn some money. Because of this, his grandfather didn't really find it odd that he kept buying things for himself, like video games or products from online stores. His last odd job would be as a vendor at a hot dog stand, where he earned a very low wage. Guilherme eventually came to stop hiding his inner rage. It was said that he would often vandalize different buildings and houses. In addition, he began to openly threaten other people and talk about how badly he wanted to kill someone. His grandpa had quite the opposite experience, saying that he was never anything but a good kid at home. He said that he never smoked, never drank, and only had minor arguments over trivial family matters. Complimenting him on his lack of drug use, his grandfather was a bit thrown back when Guilherme responded by saying that he wanted to catch drug users and burn them all to death. He also noticed that Guillerme was starting to spend a lot more time alone in his room. In addition to Luis, Guillerme actually had one more friend who shared his interest in mass violence. This was a boy about the same age as him named Guillerme Grillo. Given that they share the same first name, let's refer to him as Grillo from here on out. The two boys had actually joked and fantasized about committing an attack since middle school, although they hadn't been all too serious about it at the time. Now things had changed. Grillo, while holding a small interest in Columbine, didn't really express much interest in committing the exact same sort of attack. He wanted to go for shock value himself. He showed more of an interest in shocking the public, wanting to blow up City Hall before they even committed some sort of massacre. Grillo formulated his own plan. He decided that he, Guillerme, and Luis would arrive at the school in an area where couples would usually hang out. They would start fights with the girls' boyfriends, then pull out their weapons and force the couples into a classroom. There, very much aligning with his desire to shock the public, they would rape the female students and force the male students to engage in sexual acts with each other as some sort of humiliation ritual. Then, and only then, they would kill them. Afterward, Grillo wanted to remove their heads. Then the three shooters would end life on their own terms. Wild fantasies aside, Guillerme, Luis, and Grillo began to make more concrete plans for an attack. Guillerme came to take the position of the leader in the attack, while Luis more or less agreed with his plans and went along with them. Grillo mainly provided more unfeasible, wild ideas, while the other two would more or less ignore him. They had actually been bouncing ideas off of each other for what kind of attack they would commit for about a year by this point, but now it was time to come up with something more solid. Both Guillerme and Luis were reported to have been fascinated with an image board called Dogolachan. This was a Brazilian website in very much the same vein as 4chan or 8chan, although it was arguably much more extreme. Rather than being available on the surface web, it was an actual site on the deep web that promoted hate and violence in a much more straightforward way, given the increased level of anonymity that comes with being on the deep web. The board was most known for encouraging acts of violence towards women and certain minorities. Given that Dogolachan users had already shown a large amount of support for the last big school shooting in Brazil, Guillerme and Luis felt that it would be the perfect place to announce their attack and ask for some advice. A moderator who went by DPR was more than happy to teach them all they would need to know to carry out an attack. The two boys expressed a clear desire in committing an attack that would surpass the Columbine High School massacre in numbers. They wanted to take Columbine's spot as being the most frequent inspiration for other school shooters. In order to do that, they started saving some money. While Guillerme still had a bit of cash from his odd jobs, Luis would use his more solid income to buy most of the supplies. The two would come to spend the equivalent of about $1,115 on gear and weaponry in preparation for what they were about to do. The three boys planned to use a certain car on the day of their planned massacre. This was a white Chevrolet Onix that Luis had rented. However, they couldn't leave this car out in the open at one of their own places. Instead, they chose to keep it in a paid parking lot that was often used by Guillerme's uncle's rental company. They would always ask to park their car in the far back corner of the lot, most out of sight from the public and the security tower. The owner of the parking lot said that Guillerme and Luis were usually accompanied by a third man, one that he would only describe as young, tall, and thin. While it has never been proven without a shadow of a doubt that this was Grillo, this described him to a T, and he would logically be the most likely suspect. Using the car, the boys were buying supplies that they intended to use in the attack. One day, Guillerme and Grillo went out to purchase a hatchet. They bought some of their supplies online as well, with one purchase being that of a crossbow and some arrows. In addition, they had bought a couple of other hatchets and some material to make Molotov cocktails. Guillerme had also gotten his hands on a revolver. They first parked their car in the lot on February 21st, 2019. Over the next several days, they would use the car and return it to the same parking space time and time again. The owner of the lot said that they were always very polite and paid in cash. Given that Luis was a terrible driver, he offered to teach him how to use the car. The boys didn't seem to want him entering the vehicle though, and politely refused his offer. After a while, it was mainly only Guillerme and Luis that he would see using the car. Behind the scenes, things had grown a bit rocky between Guillerme and Grillo. The two of them were having a very gradual falling out. While they shared an interest in committing a massacre, they didn't really have anything else in common anymore. They often couldn't even have a conversation without it turning into an argument. It seemed that having a mutual friend in Louise was the only thing that even kept them in contact. The owner of the parking lot said that the two of them took their car out of the lot for the last time on March 7th, paying about 300 Brazilian real for their continued use of the lot. The owner asked if they would be back again, but they said that they wouldn't. One day later, Guilherme and Grillo made their way over to a local shooting range to practice a bit. Using airsoft guns and the crossbow, they engaged in a bit of target practice. This was likely the last time that Grillo would have anything to do with the planning of the attack. After a final blowout argument between the two, Guilherme decided that he no longer wanted Grillo to be a part of their attack. He and Louise decided to drop him from the plans without telling him. Now it was just the two of them, and less than a week later, they were ready to carry out their attack. This brings us to March 13th, 2019, less than a week after Guilherme and Louise had taken their car from the paid parking lot for the last time. Early in the morning, Guilherme hopped onto Degola-chan to write a message, expressing his gratitude for the advice he had received while planning the attack. He wrote, "Thank you very much for the advice and guidance. We hope not to commit this act in vain." Guilherme also took to social media, mainly Facebook, in order to post some pictures of himself. Much like many other mass shooters, he wanted to provide some pictures for the media to use that he felt would portray him as more cool and tough looking. In the photos, he was wearing a skull print mask and holding up his revolver. In other photos, he looked fairly normal, and in others he was flipping the bird. Guilherme planned on leaving the house pretty early that day. He said goodbye to his grandfather and gave some candy to his younger sisters. He then picked up his dog and gave her a hug one last time. He told his grandpa that he was going to the bakery and left home before 7:30 a.m., closing the door behind him for the last time. His grandpa then left the house shortly after to take the two girls to school. Guilherme and Louise had decided on an additional plan for their massacre that was extremely unique in a case like this. They had formed a pact, one that would require them each to kill one of their enemies before setting out to attack the school. Louise decided that he would kill one of his neighbors, an electrician, due to the fact that they had been in an argument recently. Guilherme surprisingly chose to kill his uncle Jorge. It isn't known what reason he gave for this, but it is heavily suspected that it was likely because his uncle both fired him and encouraged him to go back to the old high school where he had been tortured for 2 years. At around 9 a.m., Guilherme and Louise pulled up to Jorge's shop. Guilherme left the car alone to carry out his part of the pact. He entered into his uncle's shop, where he was sitting next to his friend and looking at his phone. Guilherme shouted Jorge's name a few times, but his uncle was now talking on the phone. He pulled up his gun, aimed it towards him, and fired 3 times. Guilherme then ran from the shop and back to the car. Jorge was actually still alive and was taken to the hospital, but he passed away from his injuries before too long. Now it was time for Louise to carry out his portion of the pact. They drove off towards his neighbor's house. Louise exited the car and went up to the man's home. Finding the gate locked, he continually screamed the man's name, hoping that he would come outside. He never did, though. The guy was fast asleep and never even heard Louise screaming. Frustrated, Louise returned to the car. The two decided to carry out the remainder of their plan regardless. Then the two drove off towards the school. They pulled their car up to the front gates of their old school, the Professor Raul Brazil State School in Suzano, ready to carry out their revenge. According to records, the school regularly had about 350 middle school students and nearly 700 high school students. The building would be fairly packed. For their attack, it's worth noting that both of the men were wearing clothing very similar to what was worn by the two killers in the movie Elephant, a movie intended to be a realistic take on a school shooting. Guilherme also wore a backwards baseball cap and a watch similar to what Eric Harris would often wear. A CCTV camera placed at a local house across the street showed Guilherme stand up out of the car, appearing to be speaking to Louise while gathering his weaponry. Seemingly being less prepared, Louise stayed in the car. Unable to wait any longer, Guilherme decided to head to the school first himself. By now it was lunchtime and many students were roaming about. Inside, several students and members of the school staff were gathered in the front room near the entrance. Guilherme rushed into the school. He threw what appeared to be a book onto the ground in a corner to his left. He then reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his revolver. He quickly turned around and aimed it towards the group. Aiming it straight towards the head of one woman, she didn't have time to even fully grasp what was happening before he fired the first shot. This first shot missed, shattering a glass window, but allowing that woman to flee. They wouldn't all be so lucky. As he began to fire rapidly until he emptied the chamber in his gun, he struck several more people. Two of them collapsed right there, unable to move any longer. One of them, a woman, was believed to have died fairly quickly. This was Marilena Ferreira Vieira Umezu, a pediatrical coordinator at the school and the first person to have been shot. The other, a male, wasn't so fortunate. Another collapsed in the hallway after taking a few steps away, unable to continue any longer. Several students fled through a large door in the back of the room. Guillerme decided to make chase. In the process, he removed his backpack and jacket and dropped them to the floor in the hallway before putting on his face mask. Around this time, Luis finished gathering his gear in the car. Realizing he was missing out on the action, he broke into an awkward run to enter into the school. He entered into the main room at the entrance just as Guillerme left the exit towards the school's linguistics center. Luis calmly closed the door behind him before dropping his gear to the ground and digging through his duffel bag. The first item that Luis pulled from his bag was a hatchet. He lunged toward the two victims in front of him on the floor and began to swing. He hit the woman twice in the head, ensuring her death. He then hit the male victim in the back once more before moving towards the hallway. He hit the next victim in the back with the hatchet so hard that the weapon had become stuck, causing Luis to drag him a few feet while attempting to remove it. Meanwhile, Guillerme had made his way out to an inner courtyard of the school where many of the students were taking a break between classes. When the students in the courtyard came to see the other students fleeing from the main room of the school, they didn't seem to understand what was happening. But then they all fled to different corners of the courtyard as Guillerme approached. He began firing at students once again, killing and injuring even more in the process. He then walked towards the language center of the school where more of the students and teachers had barricaded themselves inside of their classrooms. Luis stopped to adjust his boots when a girl came running out of the linguistics center, likely having encountered Guillerme. He grabbed this girl by the hair, punching her a few times in an attempt to hold her back. When he noticed that more students were escaping from the same door, he lost his grip on her, allowing her to escape through the main entrance. He tried to grab several more students as they tried to escape, failing in holding any of them back. He then ran off towards Guillerme's location as many more students slipped out. Students poured out of the main gate of the school, booking it down the street in order to get as far as possible away from the shooting. As more and more of them left the gates, they began to flee in different directions. A local housewife who had lived in the area gave safe harbor to many of them, including a boy who had been shot in the jaw. Luis reconnected with Guillerme in the courtyard as Guillerme paced back and forth, seemingly irritated. One student said that the two shooters came up behind him, with one of them firing a gun and the other charging at him with a knife. One of the students near him was stabbed in the shoulder. They finally found a chance to flee as Guillerme stopped to reload his gun. One of the teachers in the school, a Spanish teacher named Paloma Correira Pires, saw Guillerme from her classroom window as he entered through a small gate into the language center. She said, "From my window, I saw students cornering themselves at the little gate and a masked boy coming. I thought he had a shotgun, but later we found out it was a bow and arrow. I told all the students to get down on the ground. The older kids went to the door and held them. I don't know how, but I managed to call the police. They warned us that there were already officers at the school. I just thought we needed to stay quiet. I told them, the bandits are close, stay quiet, don't make any noise. Shortly after, we heard 2 gunshots." Another teacher said, "I don't know if it was nerves, I don't remember. A teacher in another room said they knocked on her door and said, 'You guys are going to die here too,' but I can't say if they tried to break into my room." Another student said that she and many of her classmates barely managed to get into their classroom and shut the door before the 2 shooters were able to make their way inside. Many more students weren't so lucky. As some of them fled, Luis began swinging his hatchet towards them. He struck one of them in the shoulder, leading to the whole head of the hatchet being stuck in his body. Now, without the hatchet, Luis began to carry his crossbow. Guillerme and Luis began to walk around the hallway, making a few jokes as they looked for more victims. When they didn't find anyone, they made their way back to the main entrance to gather all the items that Luis had dropped before, mainly his arrows and Molotovs. When they made their way back into the room, they noticed that one of the first victims was still alive. Guillerme made his way over to him and shot him in the head once more. He then started kicking the bodies on the floor at full force. They even left a mysterious device behind, a suitcase with a block wrapped in foil and some protruding wires. It's believed that this was a diversion in order to slow police entry into the building. They then made their way back to the hallway, eventually coming across the school cafeteria where 50 more students were hiding. A lunch lady at the school, 54-year-old Somara Cristina Silva de Moraes, had locked the doors to the kitchen. She said, "We were serving snacks and then the popcorn started and the children panicked. We opened the kitchen and started putting as many children as possible inside and closed everything and asked them to lie on the floor. Luis tried to break down the door to no avail. Guillerme attempted to open it up himself by firing a few shots through the door. The bullets didn't hit anyone, and the two seemed to give up. The two made their way back into the hallway where they decided that it was time to finish. They had made another pact in addition to the first one, that being that they would end their lives after the attack before they could be arrested. Luis seemingly had trouble carrying out the act himself, so Guillerme shot him. Afterwards, Guillerme turned the gun on himself, and with that, it was all over. Many students were still fleeing from the school when they felt the coast was clear. In doing so, many of them came to panic when they ended up face to face with yet another gunman in plain clothes. This was actually an undercover police officer who assured them that they were able to flee. 8 minutes after the attack had started, the police had finally made their way into the building. By then, the two shooters were already dead. The police came across their bodies in the hallway of the language center. Another teacher came to flee the building, coming across their bodies himself. Not realizing that they were the killers, he continued running. He came across 2 more bodies shortly after, then a girl's body on the stairs, and then 2 more in the hallway leading to the school's office. By now, the police, firefighters, and helicopters were swarming the school, still coming across students hiding all throughout the building. Suzano's entire police force was soon on the scene. During their sweep, the police came to find 7 deceased or nearly dead victims. 5 of them were students, ranging in age from 15 to 17. 2 others were faculty members. One of the victims was a 15-year-old named Caio Oliveira, who was said to have been a studious boy who had a lot of friends. Another was a 15-year-old male student named Caio Lucas da Costa Limeira. Another was a 16-year-old boy named Samuel Melcaedas Silva de Oliveira, who was a devoutly religious boy interested in art and religion. The next was 17-year-old Clayton Antonio Ribeiro, a quiet kid who mostly read books that was close to his parents. The last student was a 16-year-old boy named Douglas Murillo Calistino, a skater and football player. He had actually escaped the building, but when he didn't see his girlfriend among those fleeing, he made his way back inside to find her. She had been shot, but not fatally. Tragically, Douglas was killed as he searched for her. One of the faculty members who was shot was 38-year-old Elena Regina de Oliveira Xavier, who was a school organization agent. The other faculty member was the first woman shot, 59-year-old Marilena Ferreira Vieira Mezu. She was one of the most popular staff members at the school, with a lot of students saying that they never saw her without a smile. In an ironic twist of fate, she had actually been vocal in her opposition of a new law that would have made it easier for people to buy firearms, only to die from one. The last victim, of course, was Guillerme's own uncle, 51-year-old Jorge Antonio Moraes, who died a few hours after he had been shot. Guillerme's grandpa was still out and about when he first heard the news that Jorge had been shot. Not hearing the details of how this had happened, he was left both distraught and confused. Shortly after the attack broke out on their school, Grillo came to hear about it. Texting Guillerme, he wrote, "Holy shit, Tauchi, there was a shooting inside the school. Dude, 2 teenagers and they ended themselves." After getting no reply for about 40 minutes, he grew confused. Once again, he texted Tauchi in one more bid to get a response. In a group chat with a few other friends, he said, "This reminded me of my strategy for carrying out a massacre at that school. I don't know how I could think of that, seriously." In a message to another friend, he said, "Bro, the shooter could be Tauchi." It was then that he connected the dots as more news came out. He texted him again, saying, "One of the shooters had an axe just like yours." It was then that he realized that they had carried out the attack without him. His final text read, "You son of a bitch, I hate you." The police, finding Guillerme and Luis's cell phones, began to comb through them for evidence. After a mere cursory check of their message history, they found text incriminating Grillo in the planning of the attack. Not only that, but they found out that Grillo had been there when Guillerme had purchased his hatchet. It wasn't long at all before Grillo was tracked down and arrested. He was taken in, with the police saying that he was one of the masterminds behind the attack. When they searched his home, they found even more evidence connecting him. He had some weapons of his own, similar to those that were used in the attack. They also found drawings depicting dead people and a good number of encrypted messages on his computer. They even got their hands on the security camera footage of Grillo attending a shooting range with Guillerme where they practiced shooting with airsoft guns and the crossbow only 5 days before the attack. The police told Grillo that they considered him as being the intellectual architect of the whole attack, while he vehemently disagreed, saying that he was not a part of it. When Luis's parents heard about what he had done, they showed very different reactions. His mother quickly fell into shock. His father exploded in rage, punching the wall. He said that, while he knew his son had the occasional outburst, nobody would have expected something like this coming out of him. In the rental car that they had used, the police found 2 notebooks left behind by the killers. One of them mainly consisted of drawings of weapons and the names of some online games that they played. Along with that were notes for the games, such as, "After this, you can send your army to attack. It's a rather weak army, but if you do it quickly, the enemy won't have enough time to make any defenses." Another of the notebooks appeared to be the one full of creepypasta references that Guillerme had kept. Along with those drawings, they found some simple notes from school, such as a list of school rules. It was mainly fairly mundane, but the media didn't understand the creepypasta references, leading to them baselessly concluding that they were satanic scribblings and drawings of demons. Guillerme's estranged mother came over to the family home one day after the massacre. She decided to search his room. She found a black hood resembling what a ninja might wear that he kept locked up. She wasn't surprised, later telling the media, "He always liked Nazism, gothic, black clothes, and that emo fringe. Boys like that stuff. He wasn't the only one. Poor son." The police came to search the room themselves. They found a computer, a bunk bed, and an old TV. They took the CPU from the computer that contained the receipts for his online purchases. They also took some documents, his wallet, and receipts for boots, gloves, and a skull mask. They also found 6 more Molotovs hidden in his room along with some homemade smoke bombs. They then came across 11 different cell phones that he owned, one of them even having trace amounts of blood on it. Finally, for some reason, they took his Death Note t-shirt while leaving his other casual clothing behind. One teacher came to say that Guillerme's 2 years of attendance at his school were uneventful, saying that he was a good student who didn't seem to have any problems. Another teacher was more honest though, telling the police that he had been bullied throughout his attendance. Shortly after, Guillerme's body was buried at the São João Batista Cemetery. There was no wake held in his honor. Only 4 people even attended the burial. The only person confirmed to have attended was his mother, but it's pretty easy to assume that the other 3 were his grandpa and 2 sisters. A police vehicle waited outside, fearing that some sort of riot might break out if the public or the press were allowed to enter. Luis's burial was quite the opposite of Guillerme's in several ways. He did have a funeral, albeit a very short one. Held at the São Sebastião Municipal Cemetery, the ceremony lasted about 10 minutes. It was attended by many more people than Guillerme's burial, with 20 people showing up in total. Again, in contrast to Guillerme's funeral, Luis's mom was actually one of the very few people in his family who didn't show up. She had been too upset to attend, having been left in shock ever since hearing what her son had done. Luis's uncle issued a public apology on behalf of the family, saying, "I want to publicly apologize to the parents of those children. I don't know what happened to the boy. On behalf of the Castro family, I apologize. We are also victims." Given that Luis was only responsible for one of the deaths during the massacre and labeled as more of a weak follower, the public's perception of him was ever so slightly less awful than that of Guillerme. One of the victims who was in the school at the time disagreed with those ideas, saying that, if anything, Luis was the more aggressive one. Guillerme's kills were fairly quick, consisting of gunshots. Luis seemed to enjoy carrying out more brutal attacks, though. He didn't end up using his crossbow at all, instead preferring to swing his axe and use his knife on kids who hid and fled in terror, preferring to drag out their pain for a prolonged period of time. She said that she saw nothing in his eyes but pure hatred. While violent crime and gun violence are notoriously prevalent in Brazil, school shootings actually weren't. It was even more strange that the shooting was carried out in a middle-class neighborhood, an area that wasn't even associated with gang violence. The commander of the police force in the area said that they had never seen anything like this. Still, this case came to be forgotten pretty quickly in the international news outside of Brazil. This is because the Christchurch mosque shooting by Brenton Tarrant coincidentally occurred only 2 days after this case. Given that that was another mass shooting outside of the US that left even more people dead, this one was forgotten about pretty quickly. Because of that, many people don't even really know about the Suzano massacre outside of Brazil, with very few in the media or on YouTube talking about it at length in English. Still though, in Brazil, the case wasn't dying out anytime soon. João Doria, the governor of São Paulo, decided to cancel his upcoming plans and fly out to Suzano along with a few other people in similar positions of power. He declared 3 days of mourning throughout the state. The president at the time, Jair Bolsonaro, also expressed his condolences in a tweet shortly after the attack was carried out. His chief of staff, along with the Minister of Women, Family and Human Rights, followed suit shortly after. Many members of Congress began to debate the topic of gun control in the country due to the sudden increase in criticism over the country's very lax gun laws. One congressman offered to draft a bill in response to the massacre. However, this wasn't even about guns, but instead against violent video games. He was widely criticized as a result, with many claiming that he was only using the attack to push an agenda of sweeping censorship that would do nothing but hurt the economy. The lunch lady at the school was widely praised after the attack, given that she had helped to ensure the survival of at least 50 of the students. She received honors from the governor himself afterwards. She made headlines again when she was chosen to be the first educational worker to receive a COVID vaccine as they became available in the country. Thousands of people attended a large wake held for the victims of the massacre in Sao Paulo. 4 of the teenage boys who lost their lives were displayed in open caskets at the funeral. Many people were photographed weeping over them. With the actual killers gone, much of their rage was turned towards Grillo, whose name was still being kept a secret from the media. His attorney, Marcello Feller, did his best to defend him given the circumstances. He said that the evidence clearly showed that Grillo didn't plan the attack itself and had no idea it was coming. He said he's being condemned for being who he is, likely pointing to the fact that he was a bit of an outsider who was a little on the goth side. He mainly used the text messages that Grillo sent to his friends and to Guilherme himself after the attack as evidence, which indeed show that he didn't know the attack was coming, but they don't do much to show that he wasn't involved in planning it. The lawyer said that when Guillermo and Grillo did discuss the attack, it was years ago when they were 13 and 14 years old. He said that it was a simple fantasy at the time, nothing that Grillo thought they would actually do. He said, "When Tauchi took this from the realm of ideas to execution, he didn't know. Yes, he fantasized about entering the school and killing people, but that was 4 years ago, and fantasizing is completely different from putting it into practice." When realizing that Grillo having been seen in the parking lot with the other 2 killers would really hurt his case, he emphasized the fact that the owner of the lot couldn't conclusively identify him as the man he had seen. He also said that the cops never compared the fingerprints on the car with any of the 3. The police presented a photo of Grillo to the owner of the parking lot, but he said that he couldn't say for sure whether or not it was the man he saw. In the end, the court found the lawyer's defense fairly weak. They came to conclude that Grillo was indeed involved in the massacre and indirectly responsible for the people who had died. He was to remain in detention for an indefinite period of time. By law, though, he would be released at the age of 21. That means that he was released in around 2022 or 2023. He is now a free man. Not much is known about him as he lives as anonymously as possible. All that anyone knows about him for sure is that he is alive and seems to have a serious girlfriend. With that, the attack itself was over, and the only other person involved in the attack who was left alive had served his time. Even then, the ripple effect of the attack continued to be felt all throughout Brazil, and in time, even other countries across the world. While many groups out there expressed their condolences and condemned the attack, that wasn't true across the board. The attack was quickly praised by neo-Nazi groups throughout Brazil, although the attack didn't really appear to have any racial or political motivations. Other prospective school shooters began to admire the killers as well, but mainly Guilherme, seeing him as the leader and Luiz as more of a mere pawn. Guilherme's grave actually became a pilgrimage site for those who admired him, with many making the journey out to his grave to pay their respects. Many people came to celebrate the attack online, especially on Dogolachan. After details of the attack came to be known, users of the forum were excited to come across Guilherme's picture in the news. Posting it, one user wrote, they discovered the hero's profile, happy to see that he was indeed the user who had asked for advice previously. Another wrote, all glory to the heroes, with another user saying, what a good day to be alive and free to witness such an act. Some users said that they would carry out more attacks in his honor, with other forum users encouraging them to do so. On another image board, 55chan, Guilherme and Luiz were labeled as heroes. One of them wrote, Luiz Henrique left life to enter history. Another said, I, a channer, support the school massacre. One more seemed disappointed that they hadn't managed to kill more people, writing, they killed very few. The threats by forum users to carry out more attacks may have only been that, mere threats. However, the Suzano massacre did come to directly inspire many other attacks. Despite the fact that Guilherme and Luiz had failed to kill more than who had died in the Columbine massacre and overtake it as the most well-known school shooting, they did get one thing that they hoped for. They did come to inspire more. One of these was the attack on the Aber Luzada Zipinodi Municipal School on August 19, 2022. This was when an 18-year-old former student of the school entered in with a crossbow, Molotovs, and knives. He wanted to kill as many people as he could before confronting the police, who would kill him afterwards. He injured 3 people before being tackled by a coach. The police didn't even kill him. He was arrested and sentenced to prison, although the length of his sentence isn't known. Another one of these attacks was the Aracruz school shooting spree. This took place in November of 2022, and it involved 2 different schools in Aracruz in Brazil. 4 lost their lives, while 11 more were injured. The killer, 16-year-old Gabriel Rodriguez Castiglione, used to be a student at one of the schools. He simply went home after the murders and ate lunch with his family as if nothing had happened. However, he was arrested at his home shortly after. Shockingly, he was only sentenced to 3 years in prison, the maximum for minors in Brazil. In Sao Paulo, another attack took place at the Thomasia Monteiro State School. This was where a much younger 13-year-old student stabbed 4 of his teachers, killing one of them and injuring a student. On Twitter, he had used the name Tauchi, showing his admiration of Guilherme. During the attack, he even wore the same sort of face mask that he did. Due to his age, it's likely he will also receive only 3 years. In June of 2023, at Columbine in Brazil, a 21-year-old former student named Silva Damas shot and killed 2 16-year-old students. His admiration of the Suzano massacre was found in a notebook retrieved by the police. He was arrested shortly after the attack took place. One of the first international cases to be inspired by the attack took place at the Technological University of Guadalajara in Mexico. A 20-year-old man named Alejandro Galaviz first killed a woman at a motel before he entered into the university and killed 2 female staff members before injuring a male worker with an axe and 2 knives. On his Facebook page, he had a gallery of photos of killers, with Guilherme's photos taking up a good portion of the album. He was sent to prison, but he took his own life shortly after. The ripple effect eventually made its way farther up to the United States when, in January of 2025, Solomon Henderson shot up his school in Nashville, Tennessee. He killed 1 student and injured another before turning the weapon on himself. While he cited many different attacks as inspiration, one of them was the Suzano massacre. That one appeared to be a bit special to him, as he took pictures emulating those taken by Guilherme before his massacre. To this day, the Suzano massacre is remembered as one of the most tragic events in the history of Brazil, and serves as proof that school shootings and stabbings have become an international problem. A problem that doesn't seem to show any signs of slowing down anytime soon. Once again, thank you for watching my video. If you found it interesting, please give it a like, it really helps me out in the algorithm, and feel free to subscribe if you want to see more content like this. These days I have a merch store, there you can go on and get yourself some cool Dire Trip merchandise. If you want, you can follow me on social media. If anything ever happens to the channel, or if you just need to get a hold of me, that's the best way to do it. I also really appreciate when people subscribe to my Patreon. There you can get videos early, ad-free, and uncensored. Channel memberships are up too, and you can get most of the same benefits there as well. Once again, this has been your host Kyle. Thank you, and good night.